back. So now that you guys know a little bit about Assert and a little bit about the unit testing in general, let's try and make our first test right here that's more into our system, and we're actually going to start creating our real location service now, test driven. Remember, I'm going to do it test driven, so right now there's no code at all in any of my projects except for the location service test, and we're going to change that now. First of all, let's have a look at the name of the test I wrote. I'm just going to zoom a little bit so everybody can read it. Now, I know the name is crazy long, but try to read it and understand it. It's called Create New Location Service of Type iLocation Service with null as iLocation repository throws null reference exception. So it's pretty much just a way for me to explain to this setup right here that when I try to create a location service, which is of course of this type, then I don't want it to accept it unless there's actually an iLocation repository inside it. And there's probably a lot of info here that you don't get right now because there's a lot about the architecture that's not ready yet. But trust me, when we're done with this, at least you'll have a better idea about how all of this is set up. Now, the reason that I kind of made this method right here is just to kind of test the basic stuff for creating a location service, two interfaces, iLocation service and iLocation repository, and then just for testing that it needs as a minimum to get a location repository as a parameter, okay? So that's a lot already there to kind of handle. But let's try and write some code now. First of all, how do I even get started? Well, what is my goal? It is to figure out that we throw a null reference exception. So let's just try and see if we can do something like this with an assert. So I'm going to start with a basic assert. I'm going to write throws, and I'm going to explain it's a null reference exception that I want to throw. And then I'm not going to do a lot more right now except just kind of pass in here. This is how you kind of write your test code that you want to do. And let's just write true right here. So let's just try and run the code now and hopefully it'll fail. I right click like we've done a few times and run the unit test. Now of course the code should fail because I'm of course not throwing any exceptions right here, right? So it says I expected that you threw an exception, but you didn't throw an exception. What's happening? Okay, so that was kind of step one. We proved that we now have a failing unit test, and that's again how you do test driven. You make it fail and then you start building the code, and when the unit test doesn't fail anymore, you're done. That's the goal. That's how we do unit testing. Make a failing test. Build some production code until the test doesn't fail anymore. Validate that everything, the other tests are still running. Go back to the next failing test. So that's kind of the loop that we do with test-driven development.